Hi, this is Mashnu. I would like to show you now a game that was played by Grandmaster Boris Gulko against Garry Kasparov in 1981. Gulko won 3 times against Garry Kasparov. They played 8 times against each other, and 3 times Gulko won and Kasparov won 1 time, and the other 4 games ended in a draw. So Boris Gulko is one of the players who has a plus score against Kasparov. Gulko was a very strong grandmaster, of course, and he played against famous players like Karpov, Petrosyan, Tal in those times. And he lived in the Soviet Union. He asked for permission to leave the Soviet Union after he had become a champion of the Soviet Union, but this request was denied. So that meant in those times that the life of a professional chess player becomes very difficult, in the sense that he got less possibilities to play strong tournaments, and well, like other players in those times, like for example Viktor Korchnoi, was one of the most known examples of Soviet players who left the Soviet Union and then had difficulties. I believe even in the case of Korchnoi, there was the Soviet Chess Federation decided to boycott him. So that meant that in each tournament where Korchnoi would play, then no other top Soviet players were competing. And the idea behind that was that they believed that this way then Korchnoi would not get experience in playing against top grandmasters, so his own level of play would go down. But well, that's a long story about how what all the things that happened in the times of the Soviet Union in chess. By the way, Boris Gulko wrote a book about his life and the difficulties that he had in those times with the authorities, and it's called, I believe, The KGB Plays Chess. You could Google it if you're interested to read more about it. But anyway, let's have a look at the game now. Boris Gulko, 1981, with white pieces, opens with d4 against Garry Kasparov. This game was played during the championships of the Soviet Union. Knight f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, and now c5, the first moves of the Benoni defense, the modern Benoni. d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, d6, now e4, reinforcing d5, controlling the center, open diagonals to develop the bishop. g6 is played now. Black in the Benoni wants to have a bishop on g7 because of these dark squares here that can be important. And here white plays the move f3. That's not a very common move. Normally we see the move f4. So instead of f3, the pawn is pushed to f4, preparing later to eventually have a breakthrough in the center with e5. The knight then can be developed to f3. So now we already can mention that one of the counterparts of this move f3 is that it occupies a square that normally we would like to have the knight there. So it becomes a bit difficult to develop now the knight from g1. The idea behind this move f3 is to reinforce the center and have control over the square g4. So the move bishop to g4 that we see in several variations in the Benoni defense cannot be played. Black continues with bishop to b7, g7, I'm sorry, bishop to g5, a6, a move that we see preparing b5. The normal side, the side where black often wants to play is the queen side because of this bishop and these pawns that can advance here. a4 is meant to prevent b5 of course, and here black plays knight b to d7. It's a slight mistake. A slight mistake because it makes actually a bit easy for white to develop his knight from g1 to h3. Later this knight can go to f2, and if not knight to d7 would have been played but castling, then of course knight to h3 is impossible because of bishop takes h3. So here then the knight must be developed to e2, and then the game could continue like this. h5 is a good idea for black. But let's go back to the game, because knight to d7 was played here. Knight to h3, h6. The bishop from g5 has to make a decision now, and of course white doesn't want to trade for the knight on f6. He wants to keep the bishop. Bishop to e3, knight to e5, knight to f2, bishop d7, bishop f1 to e2. Now white has a threat, of course. He's threatening f4, winning a piece, because knight g4 is not longer possible because of the bishop on e2 and the knight on f2. So Kasparov plays here g5 to prevent f4. White continued with queen to d2. By the way, f4 was not completely prevented. It could have been played here. Still f4. And after trading, well, the game would have developed completely different. But it was possible. Queen to d2. Queen to e7. And now a5. a5 is an important move here, because what white is doing is fixing the queen side, so preventing this e5 move. And the idea is that black has to think of a different approach to this Benoni defense now that the queen side is being fixed. So the normal part of the board where he has counterplay is now being fixed, so something else is needed. Kasparov played rook to b8 and then knight to a4, going to b6, and now b5 is completely impossible because of a takes b6. Knight to h5 is played now. A more natural move would have been, of course, bishop to b5. But the thing with this move is that here white can castle and then have this plan. The knight from f2 bring to h1, g3 and f5. This is possible only because of this bishop not longer being on d7. So the bishop moving it to b5 gives away the control over this square f5. That is why in the game here black plays knight to h5. In fact, he is preparing bishop to b5 with this knight controlling g3. So this idea of castling then knight to h1, knight to g3 is not possible any longer. So knight h5, knight to b6, bishop to b5, castles, castles. So now knight h1 doesn't make any sense, but white here finds a beautiful move. He plays here the move b2, b4, and this brings black in difficulties. Let's have a look at the possibilities. Well, of course, white is threatening to take on c5. B takes e5, then after d takes e5, we not only have a passed pawn here on the d file, there is also a weak pawn on c5 that can be attacked by, for example, rook to c1, things like that. If he takes immediately, then follows bishop takes b5, a takes b5, and now queen takes b4, and black is left with several weak pawns here. So this is clearly better for white. Another option would be to take on b4, but prepare that by playing bishop takes e2 first. After queen takes e2, then c takes b4. But also in that case, after rook a to b1, white has a beautiful position. The b4 pawn is going to fall, and black's left with a backward pawn on b7. We still have this weakness on d6, and the attack on the king side has not started yet. I'll go back to the position after b4. So what Kasparov did here is playing c4. Rook a to c1 followed. Now this pawn on c4 is going to fall, but black decides to change strategy and now start an attack on the king side with f5. This is very typical for the mentality of Kasparov. He wants to have active play in any position, so he tries to look for resources to have pressure on his opponent's position. Here white took on c4, bishop takes e4, bishop takes e4, and now g4 was played. It looks as if Kasparov with black pieces is becoming dangerous now, and he's preparing to attack on the king side. Moves like queen to h4, g3, perhaps even knight g3 in some variations. All moves that start arising. Now white took on g4. Of course he could have played f4, but the fact is that after f4, knight takes c4, rook takes c4, g3 is possible, and we are a bit in trouble with white, because we cannot fix the pawn structure with h3 because the knight is attacked. So h takes g3 must be played, then knight takes g3, and after, for example, rook to c1, with the idea of playing rook to c7, f takes e4 can be played, and black has, well, it's not better for black, but he has possibilities of continuing his ideas of attacking. Instead of this, f takes g4 was played. After f takes g4, now comes a beautiful move by Boris Gulko, a prophylactic move. Of course, black is threatening to play g3, that's his idea, and white prevents this with a move knight to h1. A beautiful prophylactic move, and Aram Nimzowitsch once said that the best attacking moves are often the most beautiful ones, and the best defending moves are often the most ugly ones. And that's in this case certainly true, because normally we don't want to have a knight on h1, the corner of the board, but in this case it has a very logical purpose, and that's to prevent this move g3. Now of course black doesn't give up his attempts to play g3, so Kasparov here continues with queen to h4. Bishop to e2 is played now, so bringing more pieces to the defense and placing the bishop on this diagonal towards the knight on h5, and black here plays g3 anyway. Now the difference now is that white can now take on g3 with the knight, so we force black to trade the knight. So now we have traded a defensive piece from h1 for one of the important attackers of black, the knight that was on h5. Here black can choose to take on g3 or on e4. In the game, queen takes e4 was played. After rook takes f8, rook takes f8, now comes a very important move for white, bishop to f4. We see that black misses his g-pawn and his e-pawn, so that means that this bishop on f4 is an important blockading piece. This f-file is being blocked and the initiative is gone for black. White has two bishops, a pair of bishops, he's a pawn up. It's not the most beautiful pawn, it's a double pawn at the moment, but most important is that white has now the possibility of start his own attacking chances now. So here, this is actually the point where the game turns. It was constantly black having initiative and white very effective defending, and now the game continued with h5, rook to c7, queen to b1 check, queen to c1. White wants to trade queens because the endgame would be better for white. With two bishops, controlling the c-file, weakness on b7, a pawn more, so black of course must not trade the queens, but try to have practical possibilities. Queen to g6 was played. Let me go back because there is another option. Of course, the b4 pawn is being attacked as well, so queen takes b4 could have been possible, but then there is a beautiful way of winning for white. Take a few seconds to see if you can find it. It's not that difficult to see it. Okay, here it comes. Is rook takes g7. After king takes g7, bishop h6 check, and white wins this. The black king is in open space, the queen is entering probably to g5, and also the bishop can take on f8, the other bishop can take on h5, so this is hopeless for black. Let's go back to the game because queen to g6 was played. Queen c2 again, threatening to trade the queens and enter a better endgame for white. Queen to g8, queen to e4. Actually, instead of queen to e4 was a better move that would win easier, and Gulko himself writes in his book Lessons with the Grandmaster about this game that he had planned actually a few moves before to, in this position, play bishop to h6, and he, during the game, he was thinking of so many different variations that he actually forgot about this plan and he didn't play it. It would have been very difficult now for black to hold this, actually probably impossible. White is of course threatening to take on g7, and what can we do if we cannot take on h6? Bishop takes h6, because then queen goes to h7 checkmate. The rook is looking at h7 as well, and it's also not possible to defend this g7. This would be actually the only way, but then follows rook to c8, winning the queen. Another last chance would be to play the knight to d7, blocking this file, this rank, the 7th rank, but then of course we simply can take, and after king takes, rook takes d7, sorry, rook takes b7, followed by invasion on the 7th rank with queen to c7. Well, let's go back to the game, because this bishop h6 idea would have been winning immediately, but Gulko forgot about it, Still the position is won for white, but it just takes a little longer now. This is how it continues. Queen to d8 was played here, and now rook takes b7, queen to c8, rook to d7, queen to d8. There is nothing actually that black can do, only wait, and now bishop to g5 was the last move of the game. Here Kasparov resigned, and he is completely lost. The threat is, of course, rook takes g7 check, win the queen. So what can you do here? You have to move the queen away from here. For example, queen to c8, but then the attack continues with, for example, bishop to h5, and all these pieces are getting closer and closer to the black king. So we see in this game some interesting things. First of all, the way that white plays the opening with this f3 variation, and another important thing is, well, this little mistake by black allowing white to play knight to h3, and then how white fixes the queen side to prevent counterplay on the queen side, so forcing black to try to attack on the king side. This is before beautiful move, creating a weakness for black there. He loses a pawn, and now the attack starts on the king side, but it's not strong enough. So after a beautiful defensive move, knight to h1, preventing this g3 idea, now it's forced to trade a piece, and the resulting, after bishop to f4, black has no activity anymore, no dynamic attack, and it's white who takes over the game like this. And the last move, bishop to g5, and this could have been the continuation. Okay, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you are interested not only in this technical part of chess, but also in who the players were and how their lives were. Boris Gulko, a very interesting man, and by the way, his latest book is called Lessons with the Grandmaster. Yeah, I'm reading it at the moment. It's really very interesting. It's he's actually giving lessons in this book to an amateur, and they write in the book after each move what their conversation was during the game. So the questions that the amateur asks about the game and the answers of Boris Gulko. So it's actually as if you were sitting at the table with this grandmaster giving you several chess lessons. So if you're interested, it's called Lessons with the Grandmaster by Boris Gulko. Alright, I'll stop the video now, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on YouTube.